You've probably heard the old rule saying that you need at least 20% down to be able to purchase a house. And that is just factually false because there are so many programs nowadays that you can actually get in a house for an affordable price and much lower than 20% of the purchase price, especially here in New Hampshire, because coming up with that 20% can be very tough, especially if you're in that first-time home buyer position. So in today's video, I'm gonna be myth busting that whole scenario, the whole 20% down myth that you need. And I'm gonna be going over the loans that you could get here in New Hampshire to be able to get a house for under 20% down. Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Moynihan. I'm a local real estate agent and real estate investor based out of Keene, New Hampshire. And if you're looking to buy, sell, or invest around this area, feel free to reach out to me. Or if you're a little bit more serious, you want to talk to me in person, feel free to go down below in the description and there's a link to my calendar where you can book a free 15-30-minute call and we can discuss your real estate goals, your real estate options here in New Hampshire, and see how I can help you achieve those. So without further ado, let's myth bust the whole 20% down thing that you always hear. So for years and years and years, especially growing up, you probably heard that you need at least 20% down to be able to buy a house. And that used to be the case way back in the day. The reason being is because, well, banks are giving you in that situation 80% of what that home's worth on a loan so that you can pay it back over the next typically 30 years. Back then, they were probably shorter, more around 15 years. But now most standard mortgages are going to be 30-year mortgages. So back in the day, this was a true thing because banks wanted more of an investment for these people buying houses. But with everything that has happened, how expensive home prices have become, and just all the other affordability things that have been put in place by especially government programs, well, that 20% down is just completely false now, and you can get in much lower than that. Now, there are some trade-offs that I'm going to be going over, but first I want to just touch base on the loan programs that you would want to look at if you're wanting to get lower than the 20% down. And in 2025, there's actually a decent amount of them because the average closing cost for most first-time home buyers is about 6 to 7%, which is much lower than 20%. And that 6 to 7% is all in, including the closing costs, not only the down payment, which please watch another one of my videos that explains those separations and distinctions between what is closing costs and what is a down payment, because they are two completely separate charges that you must be aware of if you're looking to buy a house. So the first one I want to touch base on is probably if you've done some home searching research or home buying research of how to secure a loan, you've probably seen FHA loan. And this is typically one of the most, if not the most common first-time home buyer loan. And that is because it allows for 3.5% down payment. So a FHA loan is actually a government-backed loan. So there are some restrictions and they have stricter regulations of how the house has to be for you to be able to get it, because again, they're only having you put 3.5% down. The bank wants to make sure it's a good deal on their end in case you default and they can actually sell that property, recoup their money, hopefully. So another one is a VA loan, which is another government-backed loan. This one is for, of course, veterans, and it can allow 0% down. You can literally get in a house for 0% down. Now, you'll still have closing costs typically on top of that, so you'll want us to know what those are. But for the actual down payment alone, you can get in 100% finance, which is pretty amazing. Now, another government-backed loan that you'll see around, it doesn't, or I should say it's not a super common loan, is a USDA loan. And this is actually an agricultural loan, and it's supposed to help rural areas develop because it's essentially giving you some, I guess, advantages of buying out in rural areas. Now, the thing with these is they're very house location specific because it has to be in a USDA approved rural area to actually get this loan. But this is another option of a 0% down loan. Again, I've been in real estate 5 years. I've put in hundreds of offers. I don't think I've ever dealt with one of these. I've had people throw around the idea, but it just never worked out. And that's coming from someone who's in a very rural state, New Hampshire. So it sounds like a really cool loan, and I'd be interested in working with one if I ever had the chance. But I've just never seen it actually deployed and used properly around these parts, because especially if you're looking like in Keene or in some of these cities in New Hampshire, they're not going to be approved for that rural zoning that you need. And now the last one that actually allows for less than 20% down and is kind of confusing because it's called a conventional loan. And when you get a 20% down loan, that's a conventional 20% down loan. But they have established conventional loans that's anywhere from 3 to 5% down. Now, it of course depends on kind of your financial standing and status of which one you'll apply for, but it allows you to get in with that lower than the 20% down. Now, why do people think they need the 20% down? I kind of explained that at the beginning, but it's really because it was kind of the safe standard back in the day when really this all started with mortgages and being able to lend money on houses. That was kind of the safe standard. If you had 20% equity and the person defaults on their loan, well, guess what? You should be able to recoup your money because you only have 80% invested. So you should be able to hopefully make some money, and that's the way banks looked at it. Now, if you don't put 20% down nowadays, banks are more flexible because, well, the whole banking system, I feel like, has gotten a lot lower of a buy-in from everything. I mean, you can literally, what's it called? I forget what it's called. Klarna, is that the app that you can like buy anything and just have payments set up for, which is absolutely crazy. You can literally put payments on like a cheeseburger. That seems a little wild nowadays. But our standards have lowered. So if you put 20% down, expect that you're going to be paying what is called a PMI. So this is going to be an additional charge on your monthly mortgage. And the PMI stands for Private Mortgage Insurance. Now that means that whoever is the one actually loaning you the money has this insurance policy basically on the property in case you do default. So you're paying almost their insurance because of how low of a buy-in you're doing. So it can add up over time, but depending on which loan you get, it is removable. Some loans, it's not removable. So those are specifics you'd want to talk to your loan officer about. Understand what you're getting in and the options of getting out of things. So that's one thing you're going to want to be aware of is PMI. Now, why does all this matter? Well, if you're a home buyer searching for a home here in New Hampshire, home prices have went up drastically in the last few years. We used to be a state that had an average price point around 270, 300,000 or so in most towns, and now it's more 500, well, 400 to 550 depending on what town you're looking in. So prices have went up so dramatically, and having to save 20% of a $500,000 house, that's a lot of money. That's $100,000 that you have to save. Where if you're able to go in with 3% on a $500,000 house, that's $15,000 you have to save. So it's a huge difference, and it really does allow a lot more people to get into home ownership. But of course, since you're putting less money down, that means you're having a higher balance on your mortgage, meaning your mortgage payment is going to be probably kind of expensive. Now, again, these are specifics you'll want to talk to a loan officer about. Have them run the numbers so you understand what you'd be getting into if you did go and buy a house. Of course, like I mentioned, there are the trade-offs, and the trade-off is that you get to get in the house kind of as cheap as possible, as cheap as you're going to get. If you're a veteran, you can literally have an option of getting a 0% down loan. Now, that is awesome, and actually VA loans are really good. So let's use an FHA loan because we try to take care of the veterans as best as possible, and I think we do a pretty good job. But say like an FHA loan, you're only going in with 3.5% down, so you're gonna always have that private mortgage insurance extra payment on your monthly mortgage, and it's also understanding how you can get out of those things. So most of the time, on loans, if you hit 20% equity, you can ask for that PMI to be removed. When you hit 22% equity in your house, typically that PMI is automatically removed from the lender because essentially you've hit that safe lending standard. So even though we don't base the buy-in to buy a house off that 20% standard, it's still kind of in play. It's just in play in the background. So if you don't put 20% down, you're still having a trade-off where you have to pay for monthly insurance because of it, but once you get to that safe standard of the 20% down to 22% down, you can have it removed. So that is one thing that I don't feel like a lot of people actually mention when it comes to these smaller low down payment loans. They have awesome upsides, being able to get in for so much cheaper than you would be able to if you had to save $100,000 for a $500,000 house, but there's also some trade-offs that you're gonna have because of the accessibility and the ease of being able to do this. So do you really need all in all 20% down to buy a house in New Hampshire? Absolutely not. Now, one thing I do want to say is just because you don't need 20% down doesn't mean you can get into a house for nothing. I feel like a lot of people see these things like a 3.5% down loan and they're like, oh, that's so easy, let's go buy a house, when they have maybe a couple $1,000s saved up. Like, getting into a house is still going to be a large expense. You're buying something that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're trying to do it as cheap as possible, especially in today's market, that's going to be really hard. So biggest thing I can tell people that's especially looking here in New Hampshire, be prepared and actually have a plan going into this. Don't just fiddle around and be like, I'm sick of renting, I want to go buy a house because I know how to buy a house. No, you don't, or you would have had a house already. So understand you have to learn, you have to save, and you actually have to have a plan to buy a house, because it's not something that you can just go in the grocery store, grab a barcode, scan it at the register, and you're done. You have to actually take steps to become a home ownership. And some people think, oh my goodness, buying a home is so much involved. Well, yeah, it kind of should be. You're buying a house. It's a big deal. You're probably, unless you have a ton of money sitting on the sideline that you're going to pay cash, you're probably using other people's money to buy it. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and having an understanding of that is going to be a huge, crucial part of your success in buying a house. So with that said, I hope this video added some value. I hope you learned what the difference is, why that 20% down is such a myth and just completely a lie in today's market. But if you do want to get in 20% down or less, there is some trade-offs. I'm not saying they're deal breakers. A PMI payment can literally be an extra like $100 to your mortgage. It's going to be worked in when you get the numbers from your lender. So that's why it's really important to understand what you want to pay, how that'll work, what type of house that'll buy you. And if you're really serious about this, maybe you have some questions, feel free to drop those down below in the comments. Or if you want to speak to me personally, right down below in the description, I have a link to my calendar where you can book a free 15-30-minute call. We'll talk about your real estate needs, goals, questions, see how I can help you achieve those. And without further ado, I will catch you guys next week with another one.